What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. Amon-Ra, and you guys absolutely blew up our league-winning legendary upside running back video from a couple weeks ago, so I decided we'd do a little bit of a follow-up where in that video we talked through your legendary upside running backs have like 22.5 plus points per game. This video we're going to do the same for wide receivers and talk through what a league-winning wide receiver looks like, how to spot one, and talk through the 5 main must-draft wide receivers that I think have league-winning upside in 2023. So with all that being said, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe. Let's go.
Like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gonna let me.
Now the issue with wide receivers is that historically running backs have blown them out of the water. Like, it just hasn't really been all that close. This is since 2010, your 10 highest fantasy point per game seasons since 2010. The top 3 are running backs in Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, and you only have 3 wide receivers to 7 running backs on this table. And now that's pretty common knowledge. And even if we sort of zoom out since then, this is a graphic that I've been showing in videos recently, but since 2010, wide receivers have 33 20-plus point per game seasons, whereas running backs have 39, and running backs have 17 22.5 plus points per game to 7 for wide receivers. So that's kind of the issue with wide receivers here, is since 2010, they've sort of been pacing running backs in terms of 20-plus points per game, but that ultra-elite ceiling of like McCaffrey in 2019 and Gurley in 18 and like Kamara in 2020 is sort of unattainable for wide receivers. But the interesting part here is that this has kind of changed, where since 2019, wide receivers have kind of closed the gap here, where since 2020, we haven't had a 22.5 plus point per game running back season, whereas we had Cooper Kupp in 2021. Before that, you had Davante Adams and Michael Thomas. Wide receivers have more 20 plus point per game seasons than running backs at this point since 2019. So that's the last 4 seasons, and they're on pace in terms of 22.5 plus points per game. So that's really impressive. Like, wide receiver right now has closed the gap more than ever, and we haven't necessarily had, I talked about it in the other video, but legendary running backs were kind of chasing Sasquatch. Like, we haven't had one since 2020 with Kamara and Dalvin Cook. We very well could not have another one this year, right? A true difference-making running back. And wide receiver might be the key to fantasy football in 2023. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is that in a world where we don't have a legendary running back produced, who is the wide receiver that can kind of pop off, hit 20-plus points per game, and be an absolute monster in 2023? Now, the reason we're using 20-plus points per game is this is a really good chart from Dwayne McFarland. He uses PFF data, and the average top 6 wide receiver going back to 2011 averaged 20 points per game. Now, of course, like, your wide receiver 1 will be at like 23, and like your wide receiver 6 will be more like 17, 18 points per game. But on average, we're gunning for 20 points per game. That's your top 6 wide receiver, a meaningful difference maker in your lineup. Now, since 2010, we have 33 20-point per game seasons from wide receivers. So I decided to, again, kind of map out what those wide receivers all had in common, sort of look from a macro perspective and see what trends we can spot here with these 33 individual seasons. Now, this is going to be a loaded screenshot, fellas. Just lock in here for a second. You have me tiny in the top right corner. And this is a loaded screenshot, but I tried to make it as organized as possible. Now, again, this is all 33 20-point per game seasons by wide receivers. The first sort of section is your player info. This is the player's name, the season that they did it in, right? So like Calvin Johnson in 2011, he was on Detroit. His ADP, he was a 9th pick off the board. He had 22.5 points per game, and I have his age there. He was 26. I'm talking about the first wide receiver up top, Calvin Johnson. Then you have past production. So, you know, what was their previous high points per game and what was their previous year points per game, right? So like what kind of year were they just coming off of? And then also historically speaking, what did their best season look like? Then we have volume. I made it opportunities per game, which is targets and carries. Just because you have guys like Tyreek Hill and Deebo Samuel who look like they're low-volume guys, but they both were given a lot of carries to kind of make up for the low target amount. So we just want touches and opportunities regardless. So opportunities per game, targets and carries. And you have efficiency. So FPOE per game is fantasy points over expectation per game. On a given Saturday, you're expected for as many points per game as your volume dictates, right? So you're like your targets, your carries, all of that. Your fantasy points over expected is what are you expected to score based on your volume? How much above or below did you go based on that expected output? And previous FPOE per game high is before this season where you popped off for 20-plus points per game. Did you display efficiency before that? Did you have a high efficiency ceiling before your official breakout? Then we have team environment. Offensive points for, pretty self-explanatory. Was your offense a high-scoring offense? Team pass attempts per game, again, were you on a pass-happy offense? Was there a lot of pass attempts to go around? Was there a lot of scoring going on? And then I have your ADP among your team's wide receivers. So if you look there, Odell Beckham was the wide receiver 3. He was behind Victor Cruz and Ruben Randall. And then the only other two that weren't the wide receiver 1 in ADP on their team was Cooper Kupp in 2021, where he was just behind Robert Woods, and then Deebo Samuel in 2021, where he was behind Brandon Ayuk, just from an ADP perspective. So again, it's just among the wide receivers on their team, are they being drafted first, second, third, etc., right? Now, when we take all of that together and sort of break it down, I have the green columns as your players that hit thresholds that we're looking for. Now, I will say, before I get into that, I do have the average across the bottom. It's like your average 20-plus point per game season at wide receiver is about 26 and a half years old. ADP is in the second or third round. Your previous point per game was like 17.9. Your previous point per game high was already like 19.9. We're looking, the average 20-plus point per game season at wide receiver has 11.1 opportunities per game. A previous high of 4 FPOE per game. Team pass attempts in the 37 area. Offensive points for around 26. And ideally, they are the first wide receiver going off the board on their team. Now, when we kind of sum all this up, I came up with our components of a league-winning wide receiver season. Since 2010, you have 100% of your 20-plus point per game seasons at wide receiver being 31 or younger. 94% are a top 6-round pick. 94% had 12 or more points per game in their previous season. 94% had a previous high of 14-plus points per game. 91% had a previous FPOE per game high of 2+. 91% were their team's wide receiver 1 in ADP. 88% had 10-plus opportunities per game. 88% had 23-plus offensive points per game. And 82% had 34-plus team pass attempts per game. And I think that's just a nice, simple way to break it down. The goal was to find trends that fit 80% or more of the population. We just get this kind of table here. Now, we just went over it, but I think it's pretty simple to just say, we want a wide receiver who's in his prime, in the top 6 rounds of ADP. Ideally, they had a decent season the year before, and it's not their first time ever clearing 14 points per game. They've been somewhat efficient before. They're the first wide receiver on their team. They're due for volume, and they're on a team that is going to score a lot and pass a lot as well. So we then took this list, and we applied it to the first 6 rounds of wide receivers here. Now, this is round 1. And all of these are pretty straightforward besides the last 3, right? Last 3, 10-plus opportunities per game, 23-plus offensive points per game, 34-plus team pass attempts per game. These are all projections from Mike Clay. That's why I have the asterisk there. I went to Mike Clay's projections on ESPN. He's a really good numbers guy in terms of projecting just players across the board. He's pretty accurate. He does it for ESPN. He's, in my opinion, one of the best guys who does projections out there. So this is us kind of applying his in there, seeing who's due for volume, who's due to be on good offenses, and then the rest are pretty straightforward where they're, you either are 31 or younger or you aren't. Now, if you hit the threshold, I greened your box. If you came really, really close, like within 1, right, so we're looking for 10 opportunities per game. Stephon Diggs at 9.5. If you're within 1, I made it yellow. Now, the simple score is just, right, there's 9 components. Every green box is 1. Then I also have the yellow boxes as 0.5, right? So Diggs is 8.5, Jefferson is 9, Kupp is 8. Now the weighted score is a little bit more complicated, but it's pretty much the same thing. But instead of every single green box getting 1, it's just the percentage divided by 10, right? So if you're under 31, you get 10. If you're inside of the top 6 rounds, you get 9.4. If you cleared 12 plus points per game in your previous season, you get 9.4, and then also that yellow. So Diggs has 9.5 and 10 plus opportunities per game. Instead of that being 8.8, right, like the percentage, it's 4.4. Just a way of weighting things so that the higher percentages matter more for the score. Now, this is sort of what it spits out. Now, I do want to say, big fat disclaimer, this is not an exact science, right? A.J. Brown has the lowest score here. Fantasy football is random. He could still hit 20-plus points per game. This is not saying that he won't. It's just an interesting exercise to kind of, look through a lens that's a little bit more macro of, this is kind of what 20-plus point per game seasons have looked like in the past. Let's kind of try and apply that forward. Again, it's not the end-all, be-all, but I think it is a worthwhile exercise to kind of look through what we're looking for. Now, there's not much shocking in terms of the round 1 wide receivers. Again, we're going to go all the way through round 6 here. But you're not going to win your leagues because I tell you Jefferson or Chase are going to hit 20-plus points per game. But Jefferson, Chase, Tyreek Hill, all great bets to hit 20-plus points per game. Cooper Kupp, great bet as well. The only thing that he doesn't hit is that he's not on a great offense. But because he's such a PPR monster that can get, he can lead the league in receptions, he doesn't necessarily need to have a top 10 scoring offense, right? That's really the only threshold that he misses there. Diggs, of course, a great pick. I think the two that stand out as key takeaways is looking through this. A.J. Brown is a pretty tough round 1 wide receiver pick. Now, of course, I love the talent. I have been all over A.J. Brown his entire career. We love him in Dynasty. I think he's one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. If you swap places with Stephon Diggs, I think you can make the case for him as wide receiver 3 overall if he was on the Bills, right? But he's not. And this is where it's tough. I love the talent, but this is a offense where we're looking for 34-plus team pass attempts per game. Mike Clay has him at 31.1, so not even really close there. And then he's also the only round 1 wide receiver under 9.5 opportunities per game. He's all the way at 8.1. So he's on a low passing volume offense. His volume is really, really low compared to the other wide receivers in this area. He's never finished inside the top 5 wide receivers in points per game. He's never even hit 18-plus points per game. So drafting A.J. Brown round 1 and expecting him to compete for 20-plus points per game as the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy, I don't see that upside. And when I'm picking in the first round, I would like that upside. I want to pick players that can absolutely crush and be monsters. I'm not, even though it's a first-round pick, and in theory, you might want to sort of build your team with stability, but I'm not hitting singles in the first round. That's kind of what A.J. Brown seems like to me. I think I'm going to probably move him back to the 112, and even then it doesn't feel great because I think I would almost rather have two wide receivers that are going in the second round. I think you can make the case to have over A.J. Brown. But he's not a terrible pick. Again, I like his talent, but the context of his offense is pretty tough. You have Devonta Smith breathing down your neck, who's going to have a 27, 28% target share. You have Dallas Goedert, who wasn't playing for the final stretch when A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith were really clicking there. Maybe the pass attempts go up, right? Maybe the pass attempts go up. In theory, they have a tougher schedule this year, the Eagles. We'll sort of see how that plays out. So I'm open to the idea that they have more pass attempts, but this is going to be a fairly run-heavy offense just given Jalen Hurts and just kind of what this scheme has been. So it's a tough gamble for me to take that high in the second round, right? He's the 108 on underdog right now. Now, we also have Ceedee Lamb here that I have highlighted green. He is one of our official must-draft wide receivers for this video. Again, the point of this video, we're looking through legendary wide receivers, what they look like, and then I'm picking out 5 that I like to hit that 20-plus point per game ceiling. And Ceedee Lamb really stuck out to me. This is a guy where I just feel like he's on this trajectory, right? This is his age 24 season. He's coming off 17-plus points per game. Once Dak returned from injury in Week 7, he was at 19.5 points per game as the wide receiver 3 overall. He was doing really well down the stretch last year. He just barely misses that 34-plus team pass attempt per game threshold. He hits everything very easily. He's been efficient before. He's in line for over 10 opportunities per game. This offense is going to score points. Last season, he had 17.7 points per game. He's been efficient before. He's the wide receiver 1 on his offense. Everything really lines up for Ceedee Lamb this year. I think this team is going to be a lot more pass-heavy under Mike McCarthy than you'd think in years past. When he had Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, they passed a ton. If anything, Kellen Moore, it wasn't run-heavy, but Mike McCarthy isn't necessarily as run-heavy as some may think. I think that there's going to be plenty of volume to go around in that offense. Now, moving on from round 1, we have round 2 here. And the two that stick out to me when we kind of look through this list are Amon-Ra, St.Brown, and Davante Adams. I think that they honestly have good cases to honestly be ranked ahead of A.J. Brown in full PPR leagues. And first we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, where I just like his year 3 breakout trajectory. A lot of these guys going into year 3 do smash. We've seen it with Deebo Samuel. I don't know why I'm like struggling to speak right now. But we've seen it with Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, year 3, Chris Godwin. To me, I want to bet on Amon-Ra St.Brown. I don't know why I struggle to say his name, but to get that 20-plus point per game ceiling in his third year, I think he's in line for that. He's projected for 9.4 opportunities per game. That is behind just Davante Adams, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Kupp, Diggs, Lamb, Deebo. So, he's projected to get a ton of volume. He's going to be in a good offense that is projected for over 34 pass attempts per game. It's over 23 offensive points per game. Really, the only thing that he hasn't done yet is show a high efficiency ceiling, right? FPOE per game, he's only been at 1.4. But that's kind of just a sample where last year was his breakout year, and Jamal Williams had 17 rushing touchdowns. So he wasn't going to be efficient off of touchdowns, which is kind of what he needs anyways. I'm still buying in. I think that he can be efficient. We've seen him already have a stretch where he had 25 points per game over his final 6 games in his rookie year. It's kind of the perfect slot archetype where Goff was with Kupp for a while. Amon-Ra St.Brown, similar build to Kupp, similar archetype, and to me, he has a similar ceiling as well. Now, we also have Davante Adams, who, to me, is our third must-draft wide receiver with league-winning ceilings. Now, I do want to say, you're not going to win your league because I'm saying to draft Davante Adams and Amon-Ra St.Brown as 20-plus point per game guys, right? Like, they're already pushed up pretty high, but I do think it's important to kind of sift through these round 1 and round 2 options. Like, we'll get into it in a second, but to me, Amon-Ra St.Brown and Davante Adams clear Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, and T. Higgins by a ton. And yes, these are going to be some luxury pieces, but I think it's also still important to talk about your targets in the early rounds, right? At a certain point, you have to draft players early. I can give you all the middle and late round gems, but it is, I think, important to kind of dissect these early round guys. Now, with Davante Adams, people want to write him off so bad, even though his upside case is pretty similar to a guy like Kupp, right? Where like the QB environment is a little shaky. He's getting older, right? 31 years old, but at this point, he's still not over that age 31 hump that like we should be scared about. And he hasn't fallen off at all. Like, if we look at his reception perception, he was an absolute monster last year. 94th percentile versus man, 88th percentile versus zone, 96th percentile versus press. And Matt Harmon, this is from Reception Perception. Check out receptionperception.com. Matt does an amazing job over there. He said Adams posted success rate versus man coverage scores of 79.5%, 78%, 79.5%, 79.6% in his final 4 years with the Packers, and checked in right in that range at 78.1% with the 2022 Raiders. He posted the second best success rate versus press coverage of his career and was once again excellent against zones. He is one of the 2 or 3 best route runners in the NFL and can really only be ranked among guys like Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson in this section of his game. So he's still really, really good. He's still balling out in reception perception. He's still getting open. He still was just barely under 20 points per game last year. And I get that, like, Jimmy Garoppolo is not super sexy or anything, but I think people are really over-talking the kind of downgrade going from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo. So Derek Carr last year was pretty awful. This is a tweet from Jakob Sanderson. In 2022, Derek Carr, 60% completion, 6.7 adjusted yards per attempt, 4.8 touchdown percentage, PFF grade 65.4. EPA per play, 0.092. And then you look at like Jimmy Graham, or I don't know why I said Jimmy Graham, but Jimmy Garoppolo's career numbers, better completion percentage, better adjusted yards per attempt, better touchdown percentage, better PFF grade, better EPA per play, better CPOE. So this isn't to say that Jimmy Garoppolo is a better quarterback than Derek Carr. It's just to say that Derek Carr was pretty awful last year, and Jimmy Garoppolo would have to be like, he would have to be the worst version we've ever seen of him his entire career. And even then, he's still not be as bad as Derek Carr was last year. So to me, Davante Adams is pretty quarterback-proof. Jimmy Graham, dude, I've said Jimmy. You guys are probably watching and pissed that I just said Jimmy Graham like 14 times. I really don't know what's that. We're recording early in the morning. All right, we're recording early in the morning. I really don't know why I can't just say Jimmy Garoppolo. But you guys get what I'm saying. Jimmy Garoppolo, his entire career has been fine. Carr was awful last year. It would take a huge step down from his career average to get as bad as Carr was last year. Now, I also want to take some notes. Olave and Garrett Wilson don't really score well, but I'm not willing to bet against year 2 upside. Like year 2 upside, a lot of these guys are breakout candidates and do really well. And we only have 1 year of data on them, so I think they're not really going to do well in a study like this. Waddle, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith are clear fades for me. We talked about it, but 90% of 20-plus point per game seasons at wide receiver those wide receivers are drafted as the wide receiver 1 on their team. And if they're not, right, when we talk about Odell Beckham with Victor Cruz, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and Cooper Kupp with Robert Woods, those are the only 3 examples we have of 20-plus point per game ceilings where the wide receiver was not the first wide receiver drafted on his team. All 3 of those, they were all like middle round guys, right? Like Victor Cruz was like round 4, Odell Beckham was round like 11. Deebo was a round like 8 guy, and Ayuk was like a round 5 guy. Kupp and Woods were both round 4 guys. None of these guys had a teammate that was a first-round wide receiver, right? A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, and Tyreek Hill are all first-round wide receivers in redraft, right? So that's a really tough bet to make in terms of ceiling, right? They're the second wide receiver drafted on their teams. All of them aren't even projected for 9 or more opportunities per game, so the volume's not going to be there. They're second on their team's totem pole. Again, I like the talent. I think, Waddle and Higgins, Devonta Smith, they're good players. It's just kind of the way that things fall with the team that they're on. And I can't, in the second round, you don't need a wide receiver to hit 20 points per game for him to be a good pick. But I want access to that ceiling, right? When we draft these players, what do we get when we win? And when, if I draft a wide receiver in the second round and my upside case is just wide receiver 1 numbers, not that truly difference-making upside, then I'd rather take the running back still. You can get, a lot of the time, Waddle and Devonta Smith are going ahead of. Like, sometimes there's a lot of rooms right now where you can get Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, or Derrick Henry in the same range as these wide receivers. And I think that that's the play. Something that we sort of talked about with Pat Crane's Legendary Upside article. It's a really, really good article. Is bust rate, right? Running backs are busting at a really high rate compared to wide receivers, right? Running backs, round 1, busting over 40% of the time to wide receivers more in the 25% area. And then round 3, running backs blow wide receivers out of the water. But in round 2, they're both pretty risky bets. Round 2 wide receivers have kind of been a landmine. This is data from like 2017 to 2021. They have kind of been a landmine historically. Like, round 2 wide receivers have not been really, really solid bets. And to me, I think we're really pushing wide receivers up this year because 0RB was so good last year. And to me, it's a mistake to put these profiles ahead of a lot of the running. Like, if ADP told me I had to, I would draft even Ramondre Stevenson, Josh Jacobs, and Breece Hall over T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle. But, like, I can get those guys later. So I'm fine taking, like, a T. Higgins or one of these guys at, like, 212 if I have to. But they aren't wide receivers that I'm chasing into the middle rounds or, like, making huge targets. Like, they're just guys that I'm kind of ending up with at the end of the second unwillingly. But they're all guys I'm lower on than consensus when you look at my underdog draft percentage, just in terms of, like, who I'm drafting. Now, of course, always, all of these ADPs are from Underdog. Make sure you're checking out Underdog Fantasy. They have all the best stuff in the world. They have a pick'em. They have higher lowers where you can sort of go out there and, look at their season-long projections, go higher or lower. Their pick'ems are great. Promo code Ron gets you a deposit match up to $100 on Underdog Fantasy. You can go out there, get practicing for your home leagues, where this is 18 plus, 21 years old. Everybody out there has money on the line when they're drafting these teams. ADP is as sharp as ever on Underdog. And you can kind of just get to a spot where Breece Hall is a 3rd-round pick and Chris Olave is a 2nd-round pick. In these Underdog rooms, you take it to your home league. You're used to what a draft looks like. You can get a ton of practice in. You can draft from every single spot, and you can get to your draft and you look up and it's the 4th, 5th-round turn. Olave and Breece Hall are still on the board, and you're getting massive, massive values. Like, we did a high stakes draft the other day where my first 8 picks were top 6-round picks on Underdog, and we could just feel that the value shouldn't have been on the board. So again, make sure you check it out. It's in the description. It's in the comment section down below. Promo code Ron when you sign up for your first time on Underdog Fantasy. They will match your deposit up to $100. Now, when we talk about the round 3 wide receivers, this is kind of what I'm talking about as well, where with these bust rates, I'd almost rather take my swing at running back in round 2. And there's round 3 wide receivers that I think are actually better bets than your T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle. Again, in a vacuum, if ADP told me I had to do so, I would take Deebo Samuel and Calvin Ridley over those guys. These are my last 2 must-draft wide receivers with league-winning upside. Calvin Ridley and Deebo. Now, I love Ridley. Everything lines up for him. He's in the right offensive environment. 23-plus points per game, 34-plus pass attempts per game. He's a good age. He's had high point-per-game seasons before. He's had efficient seasons before. The only thing that's shaky is his opportunities per game, and that's just because Mike Clay's being conservative here because he hasn't played football in a year and a half. But he's still just 29. He commands a lot of volume. He's hit 18 plus points per game in the past. He's going to be kind of like he kind of makes it's almost similar to Stephon Diggs' late career resurgence, where he meets up with Josh Allen and has like the best years of his career. I think Calvin Ridley could be the same thing for Trevor Lawrence, where if we look through his reception perception stuff, Calvin Ridley, he hasn't really fallen off. You have there's a narrative that Ridley he had an 87th percentile success rate versus man, 78th percentile or 76th percentile versus press. And Matt Harmon said there's a narrative that Ridley wasn't playing well or wasn't holding up in a number one wide receiver role in his first full season without Julio Jones in Atlanta. Never mind, Ridley was awesome in 2020 and didn't play with Jones for much of that season. That narrative is false. Ridley checked in with a 76.4% success rate versus man, 80.5% success rate versus zone, and 75% success rate against press. Those are all fantastic results and right in line with that dynamic 2020 season. Ridley is a fantastic route runner who earns separation consistently. His success rates are just below the elite players in the NFL. He said, not for nothing, Ridley was doubled on a high percentage of his routes in 2021 and fared well at beating them. He also had a legendary high 90.5% success rate against double coverage in 2020. He can handle the extra attention. So I think it's pretty impressive that he got doubled so much and like looked good. It was just like a pretty awful spot where like through 5 weeks he was really inefficient. Matt Ryan wasn't looking great. But in 2021, through those games, he was the wide receiver 4 in expected points per game with 17.2 expected points per game. So he was commanding a ton of volume. He wasn't that efficient, but efficiency is not sticky year to year. And in an offense with Trevor Lawrence, this offense should be pretty much like one of the best offenses that he's been in, Calvin Ridley. So I'm willing to bet on him. He's somebody that to me profiles like a second-round pick when we do a study like this. But we're getting a discount because of the year-and-a-half uncertainty, which I think is fair, but I'll take the discount all day long. Now, after that, we have Deebo Samuel as my other guy that I like. He's penciled in for 10-plus opportunities per game, so that's targets plus rushes. And we've already seen him have a massive efficiency ceiling, right, where his previous FPOE per game high, nobody else on this list has over 3.4. Deebo Samuel has 6.1 FPOE per game high before in his career. Now, the only box that isn't checked is the 49ers being pass happy, but because he has such a role in the run game, he's going to get his opportunities without needing a really high volume passing offense. Now, this is a guy who everyone likes to call him like a running back and not like a pure wide receiver. He's had back-to-back seasons now of 15.3 expected points per game, both top 12 numbers. So he's been top 12 in terms of volume. He's been around that 15 points per game area, 15 expected points per game area, and he's cleared 25% target share 2 years now. So he's commanding volume as a wide receiver. He's giving you a bunch on the ground through carries. I'm fine betting on him just because last year, again, the volume was the same as it was in 2021. He just had -2 FPOE per game instead of 6.1. We assume that jumps back to like 2 or 3 FPOE per game, and he is a fine bet or a fine hit at ADP. Now, when we look at the rest of the guys on here, to me, Amari Cooper is a clear fade. I think at this point we've seen so much Amari Cooper, and he's yet to realize like a crazy ceiling. I'm probably good on that. But DK Metcalf, it's tough to rule him out, like him just being like this monstrous wide receiver. Maybe one of these years he just truly pops off. I just think it's a little bit tough with JSN and Lockett there. And Keenan Allen's plausible as well. He's one of those guys too where, you know, he's 31 and he's yet to have a true 20-plus point per game season. He had one like in his third year, but it was only like 8 games. But I will say, like, last year, from weeks 13 to 18, he had 20 points per game. So maybe he hits 20-plus points per game in like this new Kellen Moore offense. Like Keenan Allen, to me, I mean, if you can get him like the early 4th, late 3rd, he's not a terrible pick in full PPR. Now, our last section here is your round 4-plus guys. Now, this is where it's like a little bit tough. I think the market's sharp as ever here. To me, nobody sticks out as a clear candidate. Like, nobody scores well besides Chris Godwin, and I'm very skeptical of Chris Godwin with Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask at QB. So I don't really think, like, we've already sort of gone through, again, the title of this video is going to be like 5 must-draft wide receivers with league-winning upside. I think there's going to be league winners in this area, but it's sort of tough for me to clearly see like a 20-plus point per game, like Cooper Kupp type candidate in this range. Again, I just feel like the market is super sharp this year. Now, I will say, I'm never ruling out your rookie, second year, or third year guys. So I'm not fading, you know, again, like we talked about earlier, with only 1 year of data, I won't be fading London, Christian Watson, JSN, or Jordan Addison. Now, of course, like Jordan Addison and JSN aren't bets to hit 20 points per game like Odell Beckham. They're really more bets to be like Christian Watson, Amon-Ra, St.Brown, where they put up 20-plus points per game down the stretch of the season, which I think is really in the range of outcomes for both of those wide receivers. Again, Chris Godwin has a decent score, but I'm not really buying it. I think Judy's the only one that I'm comfortable betting on, and it's not really even because of this exercise. It's just because I think that he's a good player who's young and can command volume and like a bounce back offense with Russell Wilson here. But again, that's more personal. I wouldn't say personal bias, but that's just more personal belief than it is, this sort of study or exercise showing us that Jerry Jeudy is a good pick here. But that's going to do it for us today. I think it was an interesting exercise to kind of go through and highlight some wide receivers that have that 20-plus point per game upside that might not be all that obvious. So, with that being said, I appreciate you guys coming out here, watching this video, seeing what I had to say. If you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm